Good morning, everyone. Can we have everyone seated? Boy, the energy in the room this morning is pretty high. It's great. Could I have everyone take their places, please? Good morning. Welcome to the Regional Services Committee meeting, February 26th. And I'd also like to acknowledge that some of us are in our pink today for a certain reason. It's anti-bullying day, and it's just a reminder to be kind. And also, I'd like to also welcome Alternate Director Justice to the table this morning, and Alternate Director Haim, and also acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Coast Salish people. And with that, I look to an approval of the agenda. Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move R2 be referred to the next Electoral Area Services Committee, and to move the presenters and economic development to delegate number 2 for today, and to move that they get the allotted time that they require.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Morrison. With that change, I call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. So we have those two changes, and I would like to have a mover for the Regional Services Committee meeting of January 22nd. Moved. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Is there any business arising? This is the public input period. Okay. Is there anyone in the gallery that wishes to have some input today on anything on our agenda? Come forward to the podium if you do.
Good morning, Don Harriet, Cobble Hill.
Good morning.
On the agenda today, you're going to be discussing the drinking water protection strategy. I'd just like to thank the CVRD for the efforts that they put into developing this strategy. I had the opportunity to attend the Citizens Technical Advisory Group as a rep for the Cobble Hill Improvement District, and they really do need a lot of credit for what went on. The product, I think, I waded through all those documents last night and this morning, painfully, but it was very reflective of what the group discussed during those three workshops. Very impressed. The two consultants that were hired, Mike Harstone and Kirk Stenchcombe, did an amazing job of herding 30 cats into one direction. So again, compliments to CVRD staff and the consultant for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harriet. It's always nice to get a compliment. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? That's what it is.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Dave Munday with the Shawnigan Basin Society. I was one of the cats, by the way, so I'm quite familiar with the program.
So you heard it well, apparently.
I think so.
Good.
I think this document is exceptional. My thanks to the consultants as well. Just from one point to consider, it talks to using groups like Shawnigan Basin Society to execute on programs as a cost-efficient mechanism, and I agree with that. We have the expertise to help with the programs. One point, it says that this program can potentially provide seed money to leverage additional funding. So I just wanted to make that point, that if the CVRD in its program makes a donation to a group like Shawnigan Basin Society, we can then attract additional funding equal to that amount through various other grant programs. So it's an important function that I just wanted to bring your attention to.
Thank you so much,
okay.
Mr. Munday. Moving on now, we have someone else. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake, Director on the Shawnigan Basin Water Board and a member of the research group. I looked at, studied R2 comprehensively, looked at every page of it, every word of it,
Good for
made
you.
3 pages of notes here, but I know I won't have time for all that. But it is nice to see that the Watershed Stewardship Board has looked to a lot of the other groups to support them. There was one little point that I saw that there was many of the left out initiatives were addressed out of scope of flood protection and road runoff and gravel pits. Madam Chair, most of our problems, fires to put out, come from gravel pits and the mining of the gravel and mud on the road. The trucks go in and dump, come out, and even MOE is doing this now up at SIA, and there's mud all over Stebbins Road. This mud causes dust when it's dry, and the people that live down there get really dusted out. When it's raining, that water washes the mud into the ditches. The ditches then travel into the Shawnigan Lake water system. People in Shawnigan Lake end up drinking this. The Shawnigan Basin Society and Research Group have test equipment now donated by Dr. Ralph Turner, thousands of dollars worth of it, and we can test turbidity right on the spot. And I must say that the turbidity coming off Cougar Ridge was right off the scale, over 800. And in cases like that, we need to have action groups out there giving word to VHA, so there's boil water warnings to the people who are drinking this water in the lake. Not all the water in the lake is treated. Some people are drinking that water right out of the lake. The turbidity is bringing nutrients down into the lake, causing milfoil to grow and other weeds. So, Madam Chair, very nice to see this out. Very nice to see that they're going to support, or you will be supporting, our watershed groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and a reminder that everything is all connected. We'll turn now to, oh, sorry, come forward, please. Welcome.
Hi, Eric Picula, Yellow Point Ecological Society, Ladysmith, other places. So I would suggest that the watershed drinking water protection program service is a huge opportunity, that if we can use it to leverage, we have lots of volunteers in our watershed groups in the CVRD, and to leverage that funding, however much it is. One thing I'd also suggest too is that water protection, I think, is a huge part of that as well. So I think that to get some top line ounce of prevention to give us a pound of cure, is that things like watershed restoration need to be really a top line issue, because we don't have the billions of dollars that we are apparently going to be spending on hard infrastructure like seawalls and levees and pumping systems to prevent flooding, let alone having water for salmon in the summertime and in the fall when they come up to spawn. So things like land use and watershed restoration are going to be our top line probably emphasis, so we can actually bump up that bank account for our watershed to make sure that we've got the right amount of water in the right amount throughout the year and in the proper quality, and that we're getting all the ecological goods and services benefits from letting those ecosystems do their jobs. So I think there's some more thought needed too, and we've included it in this process, and I was one of the cats as well. But we need to make sure that watershed restoration and land use designations and possibilities out there in the landscape aren't negatively impacting water quality and water supply, and making sure that we're not having to spend billions on hard infrastructure. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your contribution. Seeing no one else, we can now move on, and it'll be delegation. Delegation 1, Mr. Horn.
Yes, good morning, and thanks for having me. So I'm here today to go through a presentation, but first I'm going to have to bring it up. Let's see if that's...
Have you got it on here? Or?
Yeah, it should be loaded up and ready to go.
Oh, it is. There it is. Okay.
All right. Thank you. So I'm just wanting to come today and go through the 2020 work plan that we've provided to you for the Regional Housing Service. You have a copy of that work plan, which I think was attached to the agenda. So this PowerPoint will basically take you through the highlights of that today, and then happy to answer any questions related to that. So the work plan was submitted some time ago, so it reflects the 2020 fiscal year. And there's three components here that I'm touching on. First of all, the first thing we needed to do for the Regional Housing Service was create the governance structures that would monitor and manage and implement the service. That's the Community Advisory Committee and the Housing Trust Fund Allocations Committee. Both those committees are up and running and functional at the moment. So that governance structure piece has been completed and we're in place now. The two components that they're managing really are the Rental Housing Capital Contribution Fund, and you'll be seeing a reference to that later on today. And that's the dollars that the CVRD has made available to contribute to rental housing projects' capital contributions. So the Housing Trust Fund Allocation Committee is the one that reviews those applications, and the way it works is that a society who's seeking a capital contribution to a project would come to us. We would review that application from a staff level with them. Then we bring it forward with staff comments and notes to the Housing Trust Fund Allocations Committee. And that committee is made up of local folks, and you may know some of them. We have, for example, Bev Suderman, who's a planner on that committee. We have Gail Calder, who is our board chair and a lawyer here in town. We have Joy Hayden, who's also from our board. We have Darcy Beveridge, and he owns a company called Salmonos Construction. He's a developer and a builder, so he's bringing that lens to the table. And we also have Lynn Weaver from the Multicultural Society, and she's bringing the nonprofit lens to the review of these applications around the services and programming supports, etc. So that committee receives the application with staff comments, and then they review the application and make a recommendation to the board of the Cowichan Housing Association. The board of the Cowichan Housing Association reviews the application and the recommendations, and then makes a recommendation to your good selves for the allocation. And as I understand, there'll be one on the agenda today for the Ladysmith Resource Center, but that's the process that goes through. So it's a fairly thorough vetting of the applications before they arrive at your doorstep, and so that's how we've created that, and that's the role of the Housing Trust Fund Allocation Committee. The project development assistance works in a similar manner, but we've made the process a little bit shorter because the numbers are smaller. The maximum allowed under that piece is $25,000, so we made the process a little quicker. And the way it works is they come in and they meet with staff. The application for contribution towards project development costs is brought forward to the Housing Trust Fund Allocation Committee for review and recommendation to our board. Our board then reviews that recommendation, and if they approve the recommendation, we dispense directly to the applicant. So it doesn't come before you for approval. But that's because we wanted to make sure that the time frame for that piece was shorter and faster. So there's a quicker turnaround on those. So that's the process. It's still quite a thorough vetting process, but it doesn't come before you for approval. We sort of make that decision in-house and provide those project development assistance grants to folks. So that's the two systems we're using for capital contributions and project development. Lastly, within the proposal for the work plan and within the proposal for the Regional Housing Service, we included an emergency contingency fund. That's one that we're still working on how's that going to look, and we're going to get input both from the Community Advisory Committee, which is meeting on March the 5th, as well as the Housing Trust Fund Allocations Committee, and from working with first responders and emergency services to look at where are the gaps. And what we're hoping to do with that money is to fill in gaps that take place when the emergency arises in the community, such as the recent flooding, and how would we support folks who are finding themselves suddenly in housing distress because of an unforeseen emergency. So there's still some work to do on that, around how we would implement that and how we would provide that funding to folks in that sort of way. So, but that's launching, and we're going to work that out this calendar year and have the emergency contingency fund, the process and protocols for that identified and clarified by the end of this fiscal year. So then the second piece of the housing strategy, or the housing piece that we're doing for you, we have a housing research and information hub, and this is part of the work plan as well, you'll see. on that research and information hub, we'll be providing things like relevant demographic and development data for people who are seeking to build affordable housing. So that's all your Census Canada information from the BC Assessment Authority, from housing starts from the local municipalities, and we'll be looking to participate in some of the community data programs that'll give us a very rich set of data to make available to anyone in the community who can go on our website and find out what are the exact demographics in the neighborhood that I'm interested in developing in, or how many people are there on low income in the community, and that sort of way. So we're going to provide that both in a database format and in a mapping format. So was there a question you wanted to?
No, actually, you just have 10 minutes, so you can go ahead. I think it's best, is that okay with the committee? That,
Absolutely.
the delegation, you finish your presentation, and then we'll have questions
All
after.
right, thanks. So really the goal of that is to provide relevant, timely, and accurate information to people who are making applications to federal and provincial funders, but also contemplating what target population are they going to serve for their affordable housing projects, and making sure there's a business case to be made for that population, for that project in that place. So that's really about making sure applications go forward that are well vetted and well thought through. We have a best practices piece. We want people who are thinking about developing affordable housing to have access to a whole bunch of best practices from right across the country and internationally as well. And we'll have a professionals list. Often when you're a small nonprofit and you haven't built before, you don't know who the architects are, who the engineers are, and this is not a professionals list that comes with a stamp of approval from us. It's just an information piece for people to say, here's the list of architects and who might be able to work on your project. Here's the engineers and the environmental assessment people, so they can have access to the right contact information for those professionals. We're looking at also having a list of the rental stock in the community, including the subsidized and supported housing projects. But that way, at one glance, if you're coming into this community and looking to rent, or if you're someone who wants to find rental stock in this community, you're not having to go and guess, and by golly, where is that stock in this city? Who owns what? How do I apply? We want that to be able to be really accessible for renters, so they can just go on one list and see all the buildings in our community that are potentially available for rental stock. So that might save a lot of time if you're on the hunt for rental stock, so we're hoping to provide that list as well and keep that updated. We want examples of affordable housing projects. We do lots of those on Vancouver Island. Victoria has a ton, up Island, all over the place. So we want to provide great examples for local organizations to go take a look at, to see, well, maybe there's a great example we can borrow from and we can build something like that. So giving people an inspirational piece. And then we have a funders list. We want people to be able to access the correct websites with a bit of a synopsis so they know if I'm interested in developing affordable housing, what are the federal and provincial programs that make this available for me. And lastly, we have a research function we're doing with VIU where we'll be doing very specific research questions that will be guided by the community, and we're just entering into that relationship now, so we'll see how that works out. But we intend to align that with the activities being undertaken for the regional housing needs assessment reports, which are subsequently, I think, coming up in the near future as well. So that's the Housing Research and Information Hub. We expect to have that up and completed by the end of this calendar year and then available to everyone in the community, and we'll just sort of keep that updated as a function of that regional housing service. Within that function as well, the regional housing service, we have a strategic planning, a capacity building, and outreach. I think part of this was the general consensus in the community that there's if you can provide assistance to people who are looking to develop affordable housing, we can get more projects closer to being funded or across the finish line of funding than if individuals are just left to figure it out by themselves. So we work with service providers and other folks in the region to develop affordable housing projects from the very conceptual stage of we think we want, we might, we like, to the very concrete stage of how big is that thing going to be and who's your architect and what fund are you going to apply to. So carrying projects across the finish line is the goal and helping them along the way. Collaboration and coordination within the region. We talk regularly with these senior levels of funding, and what they say to us is when we get 12 applications from a community without any guidance, it's really hard for us to make sense of what the community wants. So part of our role will be to help the community collaborate and coordinate in a way that proposals come forward to our senior partners that make sense to them, that make sense to the community, and they have an ability to make a priority list about what should be funded. So working with that, advocating to the funders for projects.
Just going to interrupt you for a second. Yep. Yeah, no, we need extra time. So your 10 minutes, you definitely, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, any opposed? Motion's carried. Carry on.
The
Relax.
long-winded motion.
No,
Thank
no,
you.
yeah. Yeah, you got lots of
So
time.
Yeah, so we'll also update the strategy, the attainable housing strategy, as we go along and try to keep that refreshed, you know. And the goal really is to have us develop our organization, the Cowichan Housing Association, in a way that's going to have the maximum impact. And by that we meaning really about increasing the number of affordable rental apartments and units in the community. And really we're going to partner with other funders to maximize the amount of money that lands in our community. That's CMHC, Van City, BC Housing, all those folks. And it's really about getting the most units and the most money landing in the Cowichan Valley. And that's, however we need to grow as an organization to do that, that's what we intend to do. Lastly, there's an internal management and administration piece that forms part of that work plan, and that's about us ensuring that the process of allocation has good integrity, that we have accountability mechanisms when we do hand out money to folks, that we ensure the money's spent the way it should be spent, and that you can be comfortable knowing that when you make an allocation to a group that it's well vetted and well thought through. We'll do project monitoring and performance analysis to look at projects that have been funded, how are they doing and how is that performance looking, you know. And then support to the functions like the Community Advisory Committee and the Housing Trust Fund Allocation Committee for them to do their work. And lastly, there's a component of community development that functions in there, working with developers, for example, in the community to identify partnership possibilities. Volunteer and donor recruitment. We think we might launch a little more sturdy effort to look at how we might engage donors in terms of land provision and maybe contributions to affordable housing projects. So those sort of things are more generalized community development functions, but we intend to do some of those as well where we see the rewards in terms of directly, you know, subsidizing and supporting the development of affordable housing. So really that's the work plan in a nutshell. The more fleshed out version I think is in front of you, or you have it attached to your documents as well. But that's the sort of the summary and the highlight of the 2020 work plan for the Cowichan Housing Association. So happy to take any questions or any comments that you have on that. And
Great. I do have a little bit of a speakers list, Mr. Horn.
Thank you.
I do have Director Sebring.
Madam Chair, right back to the second slide, there was a bullet you didn't cover in it. I just wondered about it. Under Project Development Assistance, you've got the rolling application. What does that actually mean?
So yeah, so initially it was conceptualized, we would have an application deadline in which people would submit an application for project development assistance.
And do it once a year.
Yeah, so when we looked at that, we felt it made more sense because parties are, you know, developing projects and they may decide in June that they're ready for asking for project assistance. It didn't make any sense to us to make them wait for a deadline to come and ask for assistance because time goes ticking along, right? So we thought that the application should be rolling in the sense that you can come to us at any stage, at any time of the year and ask and make an application for assistance. So that made more sense to us.
Is there a certain dollar amount that the CHA board has allocated on these $25,000 gifts?
So the maximum through any project development assistance is $25,000. Yeah. But the component of the fund that's going to be set aside for this, I think, is 15% of the annual allocation. So $65,000 right now is set aside for project development assistance. That's the amount that we're anticipating we'll be setting aside for that each year. If over time we see that's too much for that function or too little, we'll change the ratio. But the balance then becomes the capital dollars and that emergency contingency fund.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, John.
Thanks.
As you know from way back when the referendum first came up, I was one of the great pessimists on this particular question. But I must admit that having seen what's going on over the last few months and worked with you, I'm very optimistic that progress is going to be made. And I like your presentation. I'll be probably seeing you again tomorrow when when the BC Housing gives their presentation as well. But in all of the stuff that is seen here, and this is one of my biggest problems, I am trying to get things going. I cannot find land. And that's the problem that I think everybody in this area faces. The land, if it's available, is not the right kind of land. You can't put it in the middle of nowhere. So how do we go? It's all very well having all this money to build all this stuff and get things moving, but if we haven't got the land to put it on, what are we going to do? So is there anything in your strategy to try and locate suitable land and areas?
Yes, we have been working with several groups, and absolutely land is a key issue for many groups, and it always is in the development process. There's a reason why there's not a lot of development, because suitable land that's serviced and appropriate for multifamily development, there's not a ton of that available, and some of it's locked up by the development community. So every community that tries to build affordable housing struggles with this issue. And there's three ways we really approach that. One is we look at local government holdings. So typically, we would go through the holdings that the local government has and try to identify in partnership with both CVRD and our municipal partners what sites they might hold that we could, make available for affordable housing. That's dialogue we're having on an ongoing basis with our local government partners. The second piece is that typically what I'll look for is who are those if you will, business entities that hold real estate that might be convinced to make the real estate available. Typical, what you look at is churches. Often they have significant holdings in real estate, and in some cases they'll have dwindling congregations with costs that they no longer can manage, and often they're open to the opportunity to redevelop those sites. For example, I worked on a project in Nanaimo where the United Church, facing that very proposition, is just in the middle of putting up a 7-story, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 65-unit apartment building. But the church gets a brand new church in the bottom of that building, which zeroes their maintenance down to almost nothing. And then they receive 1 or 2 of the apartments for their congregation. So they solved some of their really dire, pressing economic issues by partnering with a developer to redo their site. So we've had lots of conversations with churches about that, and there's still some interest in the region amongst some of the local faith groups to do that. And partly is working through them who they hope to serve with those projects, and the economics are daunting because all they bring to the table is land but not capital. So yeah, that's great, but as we know, it's really not a huge component of the total budget on a big development. It's like 15%. So it's not often enough to get the units down to an affordable price, so you have to work through those things. We also look at things like Legions, and I've partnered with a couple of Legions on redevelopment projects. They're in the very same boat. They have thriving enterprises at one point, but as the number of folks who attend Legions dwindle, their costs go up and their revenues go down. But they're also sitting on significant holdings as well. So that's those kind of things we look for, provincial and federal holdings as well. And we try to scour the landscape for entities who hold real estate that might see those real estate put to social purpose. The last piece I would mention is that we would look at private parties. It's not uncommon for private parties to leave real estate in their wills to the local municipality or to the Society to Protect Cats. God bless the cats, but I'd prefer we make it affordable housing, right? So we'll be looking at how we create a donor program where individuals who might want to leave their real estate assets to a social purpose have an opportunity to do so. So that's sort of the way we'd go at that.
Right. Alternate Director Haim?
Thank you. Kind of similar to the same vein. When it comes to the land, I can see possibly one of your roles as being that coordination piece. The local government, for example, Duncan, with their OCP and zoning amendments a few years back, created or designated land that could be multi-unit. It's currently single family, and the opportunity exists there. But coordination with CMHC with regards to the funding side of it, they all seem to be kind of working in isolation. And as a property owner, trying to get that to kind of pull together, it's back to the herding cats aspect that was mentioned with a previous topic. So if anything you can provide, rather than just a link to those organizations, assist in the coordination will create that land opportunity.
Yeah, I can't imagine the feds and the provinces not working hand in hand. Who can imagine that happening, right? So, yeah, we certainly, when we discuss with them the issues of land acquisition, they're cognizant of that. And I know that BC Housing doesn't make a habit of running around buying land because they'd have a long list of nonprofit entities standing in front of them saying, would you buy us some real estate? But nonetheless, they recognize that land is one of the key constraints to development. And so we'll work with those folks as well to see if we can encourage and support them and to provide some of the funding for land acquisition as well. So
That's a follow-up?
There's also the, heaven forbid, the for-profit individuals as well. And like I said, there doesn't appear to be coordination to assist them in making a project, financially feasible, but also socially acceptable.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good point. Seeing no other hands, no other questions, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very informative.
Thanks.
Moving on now to Delegation 2, a report and PowerPoint presentation from the Economic Development Division. Shawnigan Lake Village Plan and the charrette implementation. Welcome, Mr. O'Riordan. First of all, actually, with the yay, that is true. I wanted to acknowledge Director Acton. It was very well done last night. I'd gone to it, and I'm a little fond of these plans. And what I think that I really noticed is Shawnigan, I'm very partial to Shawnigan. I've grown up here, so Shawnigan was one of the main places to hang out, especially in your youth. And I'd like to thank Director Acton for moving this forward, because I think it was a really valuable thing to do, so welcome.
Thank you. So yes, we're here today to provide an update on the outcome of the Shawnigan Village design charrette, known as Think Shawnigan in the community. The outcome of the design process was the Shawnigan Lake Village Plan and the Shawnigan Lake Design Guide. This process from the start was driven by the community, so this is not an initiative that was imposed on the community by the CVRD. This is something that really had a groundswell of support within the community, so a lot of community members were involved from the very start. Different organizations, as well as Director Acton and Economic Development Couchin were members on the Think Shawnigan Community Committee, which is an open-ended group of community members that have helped driving this process. So this process has been innovative and collaborative from the start, and understanding that in order to successfully implement the outcomes of this design process, that it needs to happen with the community in mind, and the community needs to help shape that. The CVRD can play one role within that, and there'll be an opportunity for that to be discussed at the next Electoral Area Services Committee meeting, what can happen there. But a lot of the issues working within the community are, as you know, interjurisdictional. So MOTI, the community members themselves, and the CVRD all have a role to play. So we feel that this process from start to finish has shown a way to move forward, to design a community and to move forward together with the community. So we're very excited of what the outcome has been so far, and right now it's only at the starting point. So throughout the process, there's been extensive community consultations. It started out with in April 2019 with a presentation on 13 ways to kill your community.
So good.
Which I missed, unfortunately, but I did watch it on YouTube later on, which I'm thankful to say. And yeah, and then from between June and October, there was a number of ways for the community to get involved in the process and to bring their ideas forward and to help shape the process. And I won't get into all of those, but in the end, it came back to, there was Michael von Hausen, the consultant who made the design, went through 7 revisions of the report because of all the feedback that came from the community. So it's quite significant. And the presentation that took place yesterday was within the community, and thankful to say that 96 people showed up. There was standing room only for the presentation, and it was very well received. So yeah, the implementation is now going to go forward from here, and it will be driven by the community with guidance also from the CVRD. And with that, I'd like to hand you over to the lead consultant from MVH Urban Planning, Michael von Hausen, to give you a brief synopsis of the report and the designs, and I'll let him take it away from here.
Welcome, Mr. von Hausen. And I'd just like to say that we should probably make this this is going to take you about 20 minutes, more like, wouldn't it? Do you have a time frame? Because the 10 minutes would not be enough for this.
We'll say 15 minutes, and he'll aim for less.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been moved, second, all in favor, any opposed, motion's carried. Thank you.
It will be fast.
Don't go too fast.
Not too
We
fast?
like this stuff.
It's visual stuff, so
Yeah,
it's fun.
yeah.
So thank you for inviting me here.
Can you pull the, excuse me, just the
Sorry.
microphone, yeah, it's, yeah, just, we are streamed live.
Project.
Yes,
Are-
for all
am I all
of
right
the
right now?
viewing public, that's much better, thank you, Mr. Van Housen.
My problem is I project too much sometimes, so I
You're
normally
okay.
don't need a mic. So thank you. Let's move on. As was introduced, it's been a very, for me, a wonderful process. I believe in community engagement. They were the experts at the table. We had very animated conversations and engagement, even with my designers during the charrette. We make it very transparent. In other words, they're invited into the design studio to actually engage with my designers. So, and sometimes that animated conversation is part of that grit to get to finding, most importantly, keep Shawnigan. That was the key theme. A magical place. I grew up on a lake. I had a lodge in Quebec. I realized the magic of that water, as we heard, and one of the driving factors in this process was keep the water pure. And that's about a watershed beyond the village. But I'm focusing on the village itself. But in my urban design teaching at SFU and VIU, I talk about context, and the context is very important. So how do we actually protect that magical place? And what we heard importantly this morning, changing slides. There we are. I used the down button, but it's actually to the right. It's the right button. We talked about an engaged community, and I wanted to emphasize this. This was 600 hits, an active, enthusiastic community, well-seated, well-informed, from Cliff and the Watershed Society. It was emphasized from meetings with MOTI, which we had 5 participants, and that's one of the challenges I'll outline, because there's a highway going through this village. And so we have to make it so it becomes a village for pedestrians, not primarily for cars moving through it. Very important. I'm going to talk about those challenges, the 6 activity nodes. In other words, think of using the activity nodes as points of enhancement. Connect those nodes with a comprehensive trail system, and you have magic. The rest remains, call it just polishing the diamond. We're going to keep much of it the same. And from that, this plan is about action. So there's now elements, which happen within the next year, and there's 14 of those, and we have 8 medium-term elements between 1 and 3 years. So last night, I challenged the audience to say, this is your plan, get active. You're not signing in as the 96 signed in, you're signing up to actually make it real. So the engaged community, as we heard, this is the extent of the process, and you can see the animation in the photographs. This was from staff members. I compliment, again, Director Acton, who led the charge of saying, get involved. We had signs through the village, and that actually, over time, as we saw last night, it culminated in a very active, there was actually clapping and acknowledgement last night, which is always refreshing. For the effort of both staff, Director Acton, and other directors who attended. So acknowledge that you are leaders in the community, and this community process resulted in something, and that last night was a special meeting that doesn't normally happen. It was all about talking about action. Major challenges. First, retaining the character of the community. We know a lake community, as we heard, this is special. This is about our beach experiences. This is about water. Me being a water person, I realize that magic. So we have to keep that magic and actually improve it, preserve it, and enhance that water quality, as we heard earlier. We actually have to create net environmental gain. It's a term I've developed over the years, and net community gain. In other words, this action plan is always about improving the community. Any development interests, if we couch them as that, or improvement interests, should be about creating improvement, both from an economic, social, and cultural standpoint. Very important. As we know, the elephant in the room of sorts, if we can characterize that, is managing that wastewater, because this affects the groundwater and the lake water. It's all connected. And then finally, planning for we have to think this is an opportunity for planning alternative and innovative futures. There's a lot of incredible, innovative wastewater management. We have to find that magic here and actually plan for that future. There are 6 nodes that actually we discovered with the community that are actually the activity nodes in the community. They are our first points of improvement. The village core, what we call the culture and recreation center, there's lots of opportunity there. The viewpoint at the lakefront, as you'll hear in one of the 10 strategies that we'll follow here, is connecting the village with the lake. Actually have visual and physical connections that are safe. The Wharf Beach improvement, I'll talk briefly about that. The Shawnigan Station, that is the Sager family property that's been in process for up to 25 years, I understand. And is that expansion opportunity, if done sensitively, will complement, improve the village. And finally, Mason's Beach and the connection to Shawnigan Lake School. You've got a world-class leading school. I've been impressed because they interviewed my daughter 10 years ago, and when we left the school, my wife simply said, Michael, if Athena doesn't go here, I'm coming here. So it's also part of the magic. It's got a great boathouse. How do you create, as we'll talk about, a protected pathway that actually fuels the improvement and vitalization of the village? 10 strategies. First, the streetscape improvements in the village. Hugely important. As someone came after the presentation last night saying, how do we create a sense of order and safety in the village? A key partner there is MOTI, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, because they own the right-of-way. So permitting, but working with them, this could be a wonderful pilot project for improvement. Again, creating just simple, it's pathways. There's only one sidewalk in the village, but there could be connected pathways that improve business and also the safety. Second, other improvements in the village. First pilot project we're thinking about is one of the 4 corners. Create a wonderful patio, extending the general store, that historic building, into the streetscape. And that's, again, working with MOTI to say, this is about slowing down and enjoying coming to and lingering in the village, providing right parking opportunities. Strategy 3, as I mentioned, connecting to the lakefront. Those of you, I'm sure all of you have been to Shawnigan Lake, but when I came there first, I looked down and I couldn't see the lake. And I'm thinking, okay, how do we do that sensitive environmentally? Well, we raise the canopy. The cottonwoods along the waterfront, which some arborists and so forth, I'm trained as a landscape architect, so I'm very respectful of the trees. We want to retain that bank. We want to armor it, possibly improve the ecological filtering of water into the lake, but improve that viewpoint. Draw people down, and through wayfinding and so forth, improve that connection. Improve the waterfront itself. And key to that, one thing we heard very, very importantly, is move the boat launch. Mixing power boats with swimmers is not a healthy idea. So the idea is moving the boat launch over possibly to the provincial park or another area that's safer, expanding environmentally sensitively the beach itself, improving at the same time, extending the beach, but also improving the environmental sensitivity of the embankment. So create that net environmental gain and improvement. And if we move the boat launch, guess what? The parking that's designated there is for boats and trailers right now. So all of a sudden, by doing that, expanding that parking lot, again, is a respectful improvement. Expand the village mix of uses and innovative businesses. What we heard was, what about pop-up businesses during the summer? Kayak rentals, those things that will add to the vibrancy, innovative, call it incubator businesses, pop-ups. You see this in the bottom left-hand corner. This is Whitehorse. These are where artisans, and they're actually powered by solar. In little compartments, they can be forklifted in and then pulled out at the end of the summer. Strategy 6. The other thing we've developed beyond the plan is always a guidance document that people can actually understand. So developers, or most importantly, residents, those people who are not schooled in development or construction, can look at this and say, oh, that's a wonderful color combination. We actually have a color palette that matches the cottage look and colors. So this is to inform in a simple way, from lighting to bike racks and so forth, what do we choose and how is it implemented? Strategy 7. What we discovered working with parks, again, this is just a concept. Your parks and recreation department will have to develop this into a plan. But the idea of not only safe village connections by pathways, but a larger, what we call the grand loop, that would connect the village to the residents. Most importantly, as I said last night, this plan is for the local residential community. But visitors who come in will know, say, let's linger a bit. Let's go to the beach. We can actually walk or bike the community. So they get out of their cars and the locals become healthier because they're on a path system most of the time versus in their cars. Number 8. Now, this is based on infrastructure again, very importantly. But this is about soft infill. What we heard is we need a diversity and choice of housing in the community. For seniors, for young families. How do we do that? What these diagrams show, again, my design team is made up of architects, landscape architects, so they actually design and build stuff. That this is about infilling things like coach houses or granny suites or duplexes that fit within the character of the community. So it's not major redevelopment. Now, the north side, as we see in this slide, is the Sager property. We worked with them during the charrette. We sat down with them for 3 or 4 hours. My designers worked with them on the program. Simply, this is about activating the waterfront component with a small hotel. That blue building there is only 30 to 40 rooms. It's 3 to 4 stories. Connected to the waterfront, have that active waterfront connection to that complete trail network, and in behind, small compact retail. Possible grocery store of 10,000 square feet, which is a very small format, but a diversity and choice of service. And then live, work, and other innovative small retail along the front. Seniors housing, you see that on the right-hand side. And the upper part, this is a steep site on the top, would be a combination of possible rental apartments and townhomes. So it's a diversity, a choice of housing, conserving about 50 to 60% of the site for open space and storm water management. The Sager family met with Matt, and I was so impressed by the work they've done to actually create stormwater management ponds on their property right now, in filtering the stormwater coming from the village center. So, and so that would be a centerpiece in the development. Finally, number 2, complete the policy amendments. Working with staff, look at what kind of amendments that could allow the innovative uses on the Sager property. I didn't go through this in detail, but that connection to the waterfront creates some wonderful boutique commercial, call it cottage commercial uses connected with a pathway to the waterfront. Really nice. 2 properties would have to be acquired, or those owners would say, wow, what an interesting idea. I want to do that. And it would open the doors to new businesses, small new businesses in the community. Finally, the Now Plan. There's 4 very important components to creating action here. The first is organize for success, marketing, and communication. Again, the Think Shawnigan group with Director Acton has done a marvelous job in starting that platform of communication. There needs to be, and I use this term branding, in other words, developing that communication connection to the community through Facebook, which is already established, through other means to really engage the community. And then there are 14 short actions. I've gone through those in the strategies, from improving the 4 corners right through to Shawnigan Station, really supporting, and we had a long conversation yesterday about innovative infrastructure, working possibly with the Malahat First Nation, about stormwater and wastewater management for that site. Finally, the medium term. There are eight components here that are, medium term is still 3 years. This is about attention to it and how do we solve from the Cobble Hill Road intersection. Those of you, I've experienced it twice in the last 2 days, and it was like, okay, quick, step on the gas, I'm going to survive. So there's, especially with Shawnigan Lake, students coming along and people making decisions to go to Masons Beach. That needs attention, working with MOTI. From a parking management standpoint, the positive signage in the community would go a long way. A big P saying this is free parking, not where you get towed. Really important messaging all the way through to a lakefront meeting place, which is a bigger idea. Replace a pavilion that historically was there. It was called a dance hall, but down below you would have kayak rental. It would be the meeting place for the community where they could have evening dances in the summer. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Director Morrison, you have a question? Any other questions?
A comment. Thank you, Madam Chair. This has been a really, yesterday was great. I was able to be there for 45 minutes or so. I was fortunate enough to be at the initial meeting that was hosted on the 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, and I think I was able to attend another event there. I want to thank Michael, but also you're the front man. I want your team and the community that participated in this. I read most of the report, a lot of reading. I also want to really hats off to Director Acton and the community as well, because I think I was sitting next to Director Yanni DiNardo yesterday at your event, and Director Yanni DiNardo had noted how they made improvements since the last one held in her community, and she, I think, was maybe a little envious as to how well you had done. So congrats on that. That's really good. I'm looking forward to the deeper dive that we can take at our electoral area services and discuss those policy amendments and zoning and bylaws, because that's sort of where the rubber meets the road, and there's a lot of work to be done on that. But just a note that I really gleaned from this exercise and other exercises is that being able to attend these and just to learn a little bit and to watch your work and the community engagement has sort of helped to make me a bit of a better director, because I get to see these innovative concepts and these ideas. And I too am in a lake community. I live in Honeymoon Bay on Cowichan Lake, and great ideas to bring to my community. I'm not sure I'm lining up to do a full-on process yet, but this has been a really great learning experience for me and to the extent that I've involved in 2 or 3 events. So, and yeah, I think by listening to people like you in the field, the experts, it helps to improve all of our skills and knowledge level, and improves the discourse for all of us at this table and when the community comes and meets, because I know that there's people that are sitting here today that were participants in this that will remind us of the good work that was done in Shawnigan when we're deliberating over files and the likes and the future of the community. So just want to say very well done. Thank you.
I just want to confirm the improvements. It wasn't from the consultation end, it was from the community's end. And the branding that Director Acton used, not using the word charrette that people didn't understand. There was a lot of things that I learned through that, and I thought that was very valuable, and really pulling in the community. And I think you had a little more time than I had, so yeah, a year to 3 days. So I learned a lot as well, but these are all super valuable. Director Stone.
Having gone through a similar, we call it a charrette process, and yes, it does create its own confusion. The first question is always, what does that mean? But seeing how these projects have been building over the last few years and really focusing in on the sense of place really creates beautiful plans for the futures of communities. And I know how passionate Sierra and so many community members in Shawnigan have been about this. And this is the best time to plan, not in the context of an application, but in the context of a vision for the community that can actually inform what kind of applications you see in the future in terms of land use and development. It's beautiful. I think many of us, I know, find some of the reading and the work that we do a little dry at times. But this is really exciting and passionate work. And I think it comes through in the document. It's over 100 pages, which at first I was like, whoa, that's long. It probably took me less time to read than many 30-page documents that don't have the same kind of vibrancy. So if the document says anything about the plan and the implementation and the momentum that Shawnigan can get, what a great start. And I just want to say, you know, thank you to you and to everybody who participated, because I think this is a great example of the right way to plan our communities. You know, from that sort of place of comfort, not that place of you know, decision around a specific application. Yeah, it looks beautiful. I can't wait to see it unfold. Thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, yes, thank you, Director Stone. We'll sign you up for the workshop that is on March 28th, 9 a.m. at the Community Center. We're going to pull up our sleeves and get together as a community. And we have already seen the excitement of the community. There's the four corners. I'm not sure the slide really portrayed what we're going to do there, but we're going to focus on the four corners, so that's that gateway coming into the community. And we think we can make some impact really quick. So our group will be doing that. We'll sign you up. I'd also like to thank Barry O'Riordan from Economic Development Cowichan. He's been a great support from us. And once Amy Melmock left, he stepped right in, and we didn't lose the momentum. And that said, we've had a lot of hurdles, and we've had to recover from them. We were weary about even doing the charrette. First, we were really excited about it, and then because of past charrettes, we got a little nervous about doing it, but our team stayed strong, and we said, nope, this is something that we really need to do. So I'm really proud that we did that. I'd also like to thank Bev Suderman. She's been a huge support for us, kept us organized, and I'm not sure what we're going to do without her. So today is symbolic of passing the torch, I guess, or the baton to the community, and we're going to do our best to keep it going. And I look to my colleagues as well for your support, because I think there's going to be areas where we're going to need that support from CVRD and other local communities. I'd thank you, Michael Van Housen. Your team did an amazing job. You've gone above and beyond. I know, like at the moment you're working at 50 cents an hour or something like that. So thank you. You've come to, you know, it has always been about the community, and we have done all kinds of different ways to engage the community and to get them out there. We even had a kind of scare campaign where we had signs up that said, and on Facebook, give your input. Do you want a racetrack or I forget. Yeah, we played on that. Or I forget. Bike path. That was it. So make sure you come out. Otherwise, it may not be exactly how you picture it. So that got us a lot of people.
Now I'm getting some ideas.
And actually, last night, it was 98 people that signed up. So there were quite a handful that just snuck in there or counted themselves as husband and wife. And then also in here, we have Sarah Blair is here. She's been representative from Shawnigan Lake School, and they have been helping us. She's a new community outreach position, so she's been part of our team of just supporting us wherever they could, if we needed photocopies or a lunch or whatever. So that has been really great. We're really grateful for that. And I won't name the rest of the people involved, but they know who they are. They're out there, and everyone has been helping in the community, and then and even local groups as well. So that's been great. And I mentioned that. Oh, I had a question for Barry, and it's kind of a leading question, and it's for my colleagues here, but I would like to ask, because we still want support, and we still need CVRD support and economic, but maybe how does it help local communities? So Shawnigan's success, how does that help us as a region?
Oh, through the chair, that's a pretty open-ended question, but I think from the start of this process, there was an awareness that in order for this charrette to be implemented by the community. The community needs to build its capacity to be able to implement it. And I think starting out in the process, that level looked pretty low. But I've seen throughout the last 6 months that I've been involved, or 8 months now, that the community's capacity has built and built and built. And maybe there's going to be a bit of a struggle right now, because now is the kind of a handoff period where the community needs to take ownership of this and take it to the next step. So now is a critical juncture where the CVRD isn't necessarily going to support the project unless there's direction given from the board to kind of bring them to the next step. So I think there is an opportunity within that to keep to support the community's capacity to implement this plan and to get it to the next step. And that does fit in on a regional level, that where the Economic Development Council is supporting local community groups throughout the region to build their capacity to take on bigger projects and to be able to implement things that they might not ordinarily be able to do, but with the support of the CVRD and the Economic Development Division, then they can kind of reach that next level to be able to implement things that are beneficial region-wide. In terms of tourism, like this project, for example, the Shawnigan Lake Museum is applying for a big grant right now to expand the museum. It ties into tourism in a huge way in that respect. So the Malahat Skywalk is going to be this new bridge across the Malahat to the Cowichan Valley, and Tourism Cowichan has embarked on really deepening their relationship with Tourism Greater Victoria. So people from Victoria, the recognition is there that the people who are coming to Victoria don't want to stay there for a week, and they need something else to do. So if we're going to have tourism take place and benefit the entire southern Vancouver Island, then there needs to be more collaboration. So this would be the next stepping stone. If people go to the Malahat Skywalk, then the next stepping stone would be to go to the Kinsale Trestle. And if the museum is built and Shawnigan looks beautiful and there's hotel residents there, then that creates the next stepping stone. So that's another lead into the community and ways for people not just to go to the trestle and then head to the next spot and not spend any money, but to actually come to the community and go, oh, there's actually lots to do here. What do we do next? So I think in terms of regional capacity, those are a couple of ways that it can support regional tourism, but also regional economic development.
Yep, follow up?
Sure.
Dr. Acton?
And I would also just add that creating these small opportunities like the pop-up kayak rentals, we're creating jobs for youth. Youth can stay in our community, or they could be from Duncan, or they're not going all the way, they're not leaving the Cowichan Valley because there aren't opportunities. And then also the ideas around higher density in the village. So then we have seniors who can stay in the community, or we attract seniors from other areas that don't have as much senior housing, and then in turn we would also be attracting the amenities for the seniors, and just I think it would also increase the transit opportunities that we have as well, because we have more use for that. So I think it's just something that would benefit not just Shawnigan, but can benefit people outside of the community as well.
Agreed.
Director Stone to close.
Building on that comment, because I think you were kind of throwing it out there as a seed, these kind of things beget more success. Like when there's a successful process like this, not only does it give you great tools to sell grant applications to help move some of the agenda forward in terms of implementation, but it creates a little, started calling it co-opetition across the region, where I know there's things I've already gleaned from this that I want to kind of take back to my community and help build on it. And from that comes belief. You get that first success, and then your community believes even more, and you start noticing the group and the momentum behind you both locally and regionally, starts to have more belief. So they participate in a more optimistic way, in a more action-oriented way. And that then builds momentum, which leads to more success, which then, you know, the old saying, rinse and repeat. You just want to kind of feed that cycle of success. And having seen Shawnigan Lake Museum, I would say grants plural. I think they're really great at advancing their projects forward, and I've seen a few of them. They're quite exciting. Signed a lot of letters for them, so in support of their grant applications. And I think the strength of these kinds of planning processes is that it's built for the community first, and the visitors, to quote Norm and other architects, sort of saying, are really the icing on the cake. If you build it for the people that are there, it becomes a great amenity for visitors, but it's always built on that foundation of being for community first, and that's what brings the community into it. So, yeah, just again, great process, and what a wonderful document. It's exciting.
Director Acton to close.
Thank you, to close. Thank you, Director Stone, and to that. And I just wanted to say, we're going to miss Bev Suderman, and we will miss you too, Michael. And we'll invite you to one of our big successes, big wins, so we hope to see you there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Moving on now to R1, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
there is no correspondence, sorry, I didn't.
Yes. R1 is a report from the Finance Division, Cowichan Housing Association Rental Housing Capital Contribution, and the recommendation for consideration is that it be recommended to the board, one, that $317,000 be allocated from the CVRD Housing Trust Fund for a proposed Ladysmith Resources Association affordable housing development to be located at 314 Bueller Street. Two, that the 2020 budget for Function 498 be amended to A, increase grant to organization by $317,000, and B, decrease transfer to housing fund by $317,000.
Moved. Second. Any discussion? Director Sebring.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm certainly not opposed to this, but just so we can get it out there in the public, what percentage of the total fund does this represent? 317,000.
4.6%.
Thank you.
Total project value is just over 10 million, 10.3 million.
No, you misunderstood my question. How much money is in the
Oh.
housing fund, and what percentage of that is this?
For this annual allocation. That would be through to staff.
That
So
would
is
be through the
staff, who in staff would like to
How much money is in the fund, and what percentage is 317,000?
come to the podium, Mr. Horn?
Thanks. You're taxing my brain with the percentage question, but
Wow.
we had $500,000 in the fund as an initial allocation.
Yeah.
And we reduced that fund by the amount of the cost of the referendum, which was $108,000.
Okay.
So that left $392,000, if my math is working
And we're
correctly,
throwing
yes?
and we're throwing 317,000 at one project.
Yeah, yeah, so there's still that capital balance left unspent from, that's the only application we've received for the capital dollars, and we haven't received any applications yet for the project development assistance. So there's still remaining funds in that amount that we haven't yet spent in this fiscal year, so it's not the entirety of it, there's still left, but yeah,
But there's
it's
not a
good
whole
chunk.
lot left.
That's right, yeah.
So Director Smith, did you want to speak, or you're just moving the recommendation? Okay. Director McGonigal.
Thank you, but if I'm correct, Madam Chair, through you, there is a contribution in 2020 of another $500,000 that will bring that
Oh,
back
yeah.
up.
Thank you, Mr. McGonigal, Director McGonigal. Is there any other? Oh,
If I may follow,
sure,
I,
Director
similar
McGonigal.
to my table mate, was apprehensive in the implementation of this function in its infancy. I'm glad to see that there is brick and mortar finally this early in the function going forward, and kudos to my Ladysmith partner for bringing this forward for their opportunity within their communities. I look forward to other options moving forward in the years to come, and thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. We're going to have a recess before we go on to 5 minutes for R3. Right, so that'll be.
You're sucking up all my money here, geez.
Well, you know what? That's what we're discussing.
Can we start coming back to the table, please? Okay, we'll continue on. I gotta get the big club out today. Alrighty, we're moving on now to R3, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. R3 is a report from the Environmental Services Division on the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program update, and I believe staff have a presentation.
Yes, I turn to Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just prior to Ms. Miller coming up and making her presentation, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. And I wanted to start by saying, as the CAO, today's meeting is really encouraging and really gratifying to see three major initiatives coming forward, kind of the fruits of our labor in terms of the Housing Association and the work that they've done to implement that project, the Shawnigan Design Charrette, and now the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service. And I think it speaks to what Director Stone was speaking to about success and some positive impacts in our community. And I know that a lot of work have gone into these initiatives by our volunteers in our communities and by our staff and by our elected officials. So it's really encouraging to see these come forward today. With respect to the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, as you know, as we were out engaging with the communities leading up to the referendum, we made a commitment that if this initiative was to go forward and the service was to be established, that we would be working collaboratively with the communities to develop a path forward to implement the watershed service. And I know that this board, when it adopted the service and implemented its first budget, gave direction to staff to go out and put a strategic plan together to guide this service over the next 10 years, and that it be collaborative and address a number of the outstanding issues. And as was said by some of our speakers this morning during input period, I was able to sit in on 2 of 3 of the sessions, and was really encouraged by the work that group put into this effort and work collaboratively to come up with a focused strategy for this service. I know that there were all kinds of expectations for what this service would provide and accomplish, and I think this service that you're going to hear about in this strategic plan today provides clarity and provides focus for this service, and is really going to allow the board and the CBRD to address some of these significant climate change impacts that we're experiencing now and into the future, and will give us some science and some solid information by which to make good, sound decisions around development and around our water in the future. So I just wanted to acknowledge the staff, the volunteers that have been involved in this, as well as our consultants that put it all together. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hatami.
Welcome, Mr. Hatami.
Thank you very much, and good morning. It still is morning.
Still morning, yes.
I start with the definition of the term environment, which is very important to understand that this term actually has been widely used and has a wide range of interpretations. What does the term environment mean? In popular usage, for some people, the term simply means nature. In other words, the natural landscape together with all of its non-human features, characteristics, and processes. To those people, the environment is often closely related to notions of wilderness and of pristine landscapes that have not been influenced by human activities. However, for us, the term environment includes a human element to some extent. Now, the challenge is how to reach a balance between natural environment and the human activities in a sustainable way. No matter where you stand on our planet, you are always on a watershed. A landscape feature also referred to as a catchment or a drainage basin. A watershed is defined as an area of land where all the surface water drains into the same place, whether it's a creek, stream, it's a river, or an ocean. Therefore, all of the precipitation in form of snow and rain that falls on a watershed ends up flowing to the same place. Watershed protection is a means of protecting a lake, river, or a stream by managing the entire watershed that drains into it. A healthy watershed can reduce the impacts of a flood, minimize the economic burden on public infrastructure, reduce erosion and water treatment costs, and can restore natural groundwater recharge. Our natural ecosystems are made up of forests, wetlands, water sources, plants, and animals, and provide multiple goods and services that contribute to a healthy economy, environment, and people. Every day, we rely on ecosystem goods and services. They connect us to our environment. A healthy watershed provides the safe drinking water, provides food, enables us to adapt to the impact of climate change. A healthy watershed conserves water, promotes stream flow, supports sustainable streams, rivers, lakes, and groundwater sources, enables healthy soil for crops and livestock, and also provides habitat for wildlife and plants. A healthy watershed produces energy and supplies water for agriculture, industry, and households. Forests and wetlands help to prevent or reduce costly climate change and flooding impacts, manages drought, contributes to the tourism, fisheries, agriculture, and mining activities. Now, how to have a healthy watershed and how to protect it? In order to do that, we need to understand the characteristic of the watershed and its health, and at the same time, it means to understand the limitation of the watershed in providing us with the sustainable services. It helps us to make decisions on existing and future land use, and that's based on the data that we have for the watershed characteristics. All of the above requires a strategy or an approach to achieve the mentioned goals. We started and developed that strategy by engaging all of the stakeholders, from NGOs, ENGOs, municipalities, government agencies, and special interest groups. Now I ask, Kate to actually walk you through that strategy, the proposed strategy. Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I've got a cold, so I just want to make sure you've got it. Good. First, I want to thank Mr. Carruthers for the acknowledgement of the support of the Public and Technical Advisory Committee, and we've got a few of them here today. But I also want to acknowledge the support of CVRD staff who also actively engaged, as well as the staff of our municipal partners who were interested and engaged over the life of the last year's worth of work. So that's been extremely helpful to make sure that the strategy before you is relevant to our organizations to make the decisions that we need to make. We've also had fabulous partnership and relationships with the province, who are obviously really interested in what we're doing, but it's been a very challenging discussion because you know, it's that nexus of we don't want to take down too much responsibility. We'd really like to ensure that we're clear about what their role is, but having those discussions is a fundamental component of this program. So I'm just going to take you through it briefly. And the first section is I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you just kind of casting back to what the charge that the board provided with us when we came forward last year to look at the budget. And so the board was really clear with us that we had a draft strategy last year. They wanted to make sure that we went out to the public and the various partners to have input into the strategy. And we've done that. We feel that that has been complete. And we're going to go through a little bit of that process later on. You also asked for us to answer the really tricky question, to come back with some recommendations about the very tricky issues. How do we spend the money? How do we support our community at the same time as making sure that the program provides good value to the residents of our areas who are ultimately paying for it? What does that look like? How does the money get shared across the region? And the third piece was this issue around governance, whether there should be an oversight committee or what that would look like. And so there's recommendations within the process here. In addition to what the board directly requested us to undertake, we also spent time doing quite a bit of background technical information, technical data collection, and that includes the MOAs, or the developmental memorandums of agreement with the provincial entities who are going to be supporting this process, developing much more detailed analysis in terms of what the cost will be to run some of these programs. So some of the strategic planning work, particularly around some of the key issues, the surface water quality, the cost for hydrometric monitoring stations, et cetera. We've also, in anticipation of the program's rollout, started to develop some public information, some public communications documents. So really drilling down to some of the work that we'd done previously under the Watershed Atlas process, and developing quick summaries for our communities so that they can quickly understand what the issues are within their area, their watersheds, and then included things like narratives, story videos from some of the key community members. We've also had ongoing discussions. The board was part of a longer process around water governance. A number of years ago, we received funding through the gas tax program, and that focused on our relationship with First Nations across the region. And so we've had a sort of a separate process working with the many First Nations in our regions, talking about what this means to them. How can we work effectively with them? How can we be respectful in terms of what that relationship looks like going forward? So what did the public consultation process look like? So maybe just to go back for one thing, just to also mention, while we've done this work, you are going to be seeing some recommendations in the staff report, and a component of that is bringing forward a separate staff report based on your direction today in March for the triggering of the Technical Advisory Committee, as well as the policy direction with regards to the strategic partnerships component of the work itself. So that'll be coming forward in a more detailed, nuanced fashion next month based on your direction today. Oops, wrong direction. So the consultation process. We engaged with, I think, a very positive cohort of cats, if you will. They were sitting in the group, who really came to the process with very different opinions, very different lenses, because they represented the broader community. They were not a homogenous group, and so that was a very exciting process. So given the multiple stakeholders who will benefit as well as inform the strategy, we used a multi-party process with the support of 2 consulting groups, Econics and Waterworks. Some of you remembered Compass Resource Management assisted us with the Cowichan Water Use Plan and followed a very clear structure, a very neutral structure that allowed us to move forward fairly quickly. And I think that this process was very successful over the very short compressed period of time that we were able to come together as a group very, very quickly to identify where the issues were, drill down, look for solutions, as opposed to getting mired into other kind of side discussions. So that was a very process. All groups recognized very early on in the process that the program did not have the necessary funds to achieve all of the objectives that they came to the table desiring, and so that the resources that we needed to look at and the scale that we needed to look at needed to be merged together. And I think that was accomplished with the strategy and the priority objectives within it. Given that the program was intended as cross-organizational, so this is not a silo that we're creating, this is not a project that we're creating, this is a new program that provides support directly to both the electoral areas as well as our municipal partners and the larger community. And so we needed to work effectively with our municipal partners and outside groups as well in order to inform that. Lastly, we knew that we couldn't do this alone, and so part of the process was to really recognize that the partnership model was a fundamental component moving forward for us. So working with stewardship groups. That didn't mean that we would necessarily take on all of the activities and the responsibilities and the financial burden of doing everything, but we wanted to create a space in which we could collaborate, leverage against each other, and then focus within each of the areas of priorities that those organizations have. So it's about building a bigger pie as opposed to slicing it up, and I think that work will continue, and we certainly look at it within the organization as how can we work more effectively with the limited resources that we have. For the First Nations piece, one of the sort of the longer discussions that we have instead of simply working with the First Nations or meeting with the First Nations and saying, oh, we've got this new program at the CVRD, what do you think of it, is to really spend the time with them in a reflective process that's driven by their needs and their perspectives. One of the original hopes and aspirations had been that this program and how it gets rolled out and nuanced in terms of the decisions that we make from a land management perspective would be informed by the historic knowledge of place and the current knowledge of desires in terms of achieving reconciliation. And so recognizing that that's a slow process, it needs to be reflective, and it needs to be throughout the community, that it's not simply with a staff member to staff member or chief and council of the day to board of the day, but that it's really cross-cutting for the years to come, and that it's deeply embedded and rooted in both of our communities, if you will, perspectives of this program. So we think that we've achieved the metrics of what the board has asked us to do in terms of consultation and adaptive input. So the next sort of piece that we grappled with is, okay, we're kind of aligned. We've got one goal that we've agreed to in terms of what we want to achieve. The next question was, where do we focus those efforts? Should it be in one area or another area? What does that look like over the life of the program? And so the Public and Technical Committee worked through a fairly intensive process of trade-offs and weighted choice discussions to come to an agreement on where the efforts of the program should be applied. It was initially the most challenging item, but the group quickly recognized that the priority in the first 5 years should be in the science portion of the program, which is what you see at the top. So we've got these 3 bundles of work: communications, outreach, kind of the relationship building piece, the data, the hard science, the acquisition of information so that we can make better decisions, and then the planning and advocacy piece. How do we actually put it into operational terms? And so for the first 5 years of the program, the emphasis is going to be building the information base while we build those other relationships with organizational groups and with the public. And as we move towards the second half of the 10-year strategy, we start to see that dial shift to actually using the information more effectively and consistently. So as we start to look at, say, for example, the modernization process of the OCPs, that information, those targets, those key principles will be embedded into those plans and strategies. So you see the shift over time in terms of where we should focus our efforts and where we should focus the investment of the program's limited funding.
Great slide, by the way.
You like the dials?
I like this. It was a very great slide.
We'll do more dials in the future.
Yeah, okay.
So now that we know kind of where we're going to spend the funding, the next question really came down to one of the root questions that the board had is, how do we actually spend the funds? Right? So yeah, we know we're going to do science, but should it be in this area or this area? Should it be by grant programs, et cetera? And so we have what's called an implementation strategy, which I think is, we probably might want to change the wording around it, because implementation means something different to me than really how do we spend the money and what are the metrics around it. So the implementation strategy, as it's termed right now, really focuses on how we spend the available funds. And it responds to the question about funding, and funding community organizations, and funding key initiatives or strategic partnerships. And specifically the expectations of the program to support community-based initiatives was something that came up over and over again in the community narratives. So the group, again, recognized that the funds are limited, and the best use of the funds to meet the program's objectives was critical. So we need to be strategic in how the funds are spent. So we talked about 4 kind of delivery methods were discussed. Funding for community organizations to take on some of the necessary work where appropriate. So a fee-for-service type of model in many cases, or seed funding. The use of consultants and specialized services using the CVRD's current purchasing policy guidelines. Partnerships with academic organizations and provincial ministries, which might not follow purchasing guidelines but meet the objectives of the program itself, and so a slightly different connection there. And then the notion around strategic partnerships, and so these are noted as strategic partnerships and initiatives which have met the board measure of who those partners are. It's not just an application process for some, and it's by discretion of the board that would provide not for fee-for-service types of activities, but core funding to support them to make sure that they're able to support our program more effectively going forward. And then finally, the recognition that in order for this program to be functional and go forward, there is a requirement for in-house funding for oversight of the programs and staffing itself. So we feel that that was a metric that we had met. The slight detail with regards to this, the strategic partnerships line item is in the draft 2020 budget, and it's noted in the top end in the sort of the general component of the function as a grant function. We're going to be changing that terminology in the amended budget to recognize that it is in fact for the strategic partnerships. There's a $60,000 budget identified there for the 2020 fiscal period, of which $50,000 is notationally identified as a contribution to the Cowichan Watershed Board. So, what does the plan actually look like? You've got a copy here in front of you, so I'm not going to dive
So you have this was handed out,
Yep,
front and back.
front and back. Now, many of you will have looked at the package and went, oh my gosh, that's a whole lot of reading. And so what we did is we tried to summarize that document, which is still in editing mode going forward, into something that was much more accessible to both you as decision makers, but also the general public who just needs a high level piece of information. And so that's a citizen's guide that we've prepared, and you've just got a 2-page summary here that focuses on kind of the key components of that. So the idea is that it's a easy, high-level discussion, something that you can bring out at your community meetings, or if you want an extraction of it for your newsletters, et cetera, we're more than happy to provide that to you, as well as a PowerPoint when you go out to the future. So all of that to say is we spent a lot of time talking about the regional district strategic plan. And so originally when we started to talk about this process in terms of the 10-year strategic plan, we started with the first piece. Well, we need to have, you know, a vision and a mission and all the rest of that. And we very quickly, with the suggestion of Brian, is that the organization, this is a strategy of the CVRD to run and maintain a new function, a new program. And so it doesn't need its own mission and vision. The CVRD already has one. What it needs to do is take the original goal within that strategy and refine it. And so what you've got within this strategy is one goal, which has been refined around the notion of healthy watersheds. There are some discussions around kind of a second tagline and whether or not that should be in Hulkaminam or other dialects of the community. That's a sensitive topic, and we want to make sure that we are not inadvertently using language that we shouldn't use, nor without the direct relationship. So right now that goal stands as a governmental interpretation of the goal. There are 4 guiding principles, which are back to the strategy and back to the direction of the board: partnership-based, action-oriented, adaptive, and uses continuous improvement to make sure that we are learning as we're going along, we're refining it. And we're using performance measures, that we are not just undertaking this work for the exercise of collecting data, but that the data itself provides meaningful information, and that it is collected to certain standards, and that the outcomes of the programs going forward also meet performance standards. Did we change minds? Have we got better land use practices? Do we have better operational decision making? Very clear on that. There are 3 program areas upon which everything is clustered: learning, acting, stewardship, and outreach. And so again, it's this kind of notation of looking at that. We've also identified 14 priority areas over the next 10 years with specific programs and projects supporting those priority areas going forward. And you've got an example of that in front of you, kind of summarized on the blue page at a very high level, and then summarized in another level down, kind of level 1. If you will, on the backside. Okay, so for the first 2 years, and the reason why we're here in front of you today is that we've got a notational budget for 2020 pending the development of the strategy and the delivery of the strategy to you. We've also spent some time during that process adjusting the budget and adjusting what the priorities are. We've identified the following kind of key priorities in the first 2 years of things that we need to get on the road now in order to inform movement forward. So, The focus builds on builds early on in the program, the core elements that we'll use going forward. We need to get groundwater monitoring wells so that we can get the data so that in 5 years' time we'll have enough information to make better land use decisions, et cetera. Getting the climate monitoring stations in place so that informs emergency management, it informs stormwater management, all of these other kinds of variables. Undertaking risk assessments to guide future work is also a major priority. What we said to the public when we went out is that while we wanted to make sure that the program was regional in nature, that the whole community benefits, we are going to be making decisions based on risk in terms of where we put our level of effort early on in the program, that the whole community benefits as a result of that, but we need to be clear that there are areas within the region that have serious risks to water supply or water quality going forward. And lastly, building in-house capacity. And so those are the components there in front of you to meet those objectives that I just described. So the recommended next steps, and they're encapsulated in the two motions within the staff report, but are basically to adopt the strategy. It's been delivered to you. Adopt the implementation framework, which focuses on how we're going to spend money and allows us to partner with key organizations. Consider the staffing needs for the program and its implementation. It's very challenging to move this program forward without staff. So that's an issue. Along all of those lines, you've got a budget amendment, which is attached to the staff report, which allows us to focus on, refine the initial budget and move forward. And lastly, to approve the TAC recommendations to support the development of terms of reference. And so that's part of an embedded motion within you today and allows us to come forward with specific recommendations in March. Lastly, we would like to launch the program. It's gone fairly silent with the exception of our kind of closed discussion with partners. We've had a number of public presentations in terms of status of the program, but largely the larger general community is unaware of activities today, so we'd like to be able to launch that fairly soon. So any questions?
Great, I have Director Morrison first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would imagine that that Ms. Miller and staff working on this are pretty darn happy to have this delivered to the committee. And I want to congratulate you on what I found to be a very thorough document. So thank you. I've been anticipating this for some time, and being able to act on the public's endorsement of this initiative is really important. I want to share a quick story about the fact that I walk my dog twice a day past the post office in Honeymoon Bay, and that seems to be where I have a fair bit of interaction with people in my community. And yesterday was no exception, and an individual came to me and spoke of the number of residents and wells on Walton Road in Honeymoon Bay that either went dry or their wells went dry or almost went dry during the drought last year. And it was a difficult conversation because one of his neighbors, their well literally went dry the day the pumping started over the weir. And it was a challenging conversation because I don't know if their aquifer is connected to the lake or not, and so there's obviously that need for that critical data for us to know about, especially in the populated areas moving forward. So I congratulate you on this. I think this is really good. I'm supportive of the work that's been done, and I think I'm going to have to reread the report. But I do have a question in that, and I want to thank I think we're going to have to call you the cool cats that participated in this. But I noted in the groups that you consulted with that it was fairly broad and fairly far-reaching. And I noticed that you connected with our municipal partners and likely their staff. And I'm sure that you covered this off, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. Was the electoral area perspective input incorporated? Was that information and that perspective brought to this this exercise through the regional district staff or community groups? Or can you tell me how that sort of unique perspective was brought to this process?
Ms. Miller.
If I may, thank you through the chair to you. Excellent question. And it was one of the challenges that we had is what's the most effective way to get that information so that it's timely, it's useful to us, and it's not just information going in one direction, but it creates a long-term relationship where it's shared information, shared values, those sorts of discussions. And so we had a number of meetings with CVRD staff made up of parks, public safety, current planning, long-range planning, utilities, asset management, kind of a cross-cutting across the organization to be able to have a discussion about what we wanted to achieve, but also ask them the critical questions about what they wanted to achieve through this function. What tools do they need? What questions do they have? So that informed our ability to be able to more effectively provide that data to them in time, or recommendations to them in time. And I think that was probably the most effective way to really understand from an electoral area perspective in terms of delivery and value for the electoral areas, what the staff that are charged with activities in those areas need. On another level, we also worked with the sort of the cross-cutting public process to identify from the public's perspective of what the electoral area needs. And so, for example, we had participation from private utilities, from ENGOs, from members of advisory commissions, those sorts of things. So there's kind of this duality in terms of, from a technical perspective, from a professional perspective, but also from a community technical perspective to be able to inform that. So.
Thank you.
So I have Directors Acton and Smith, and then we'll have the resolution read out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious about some of the discussions that went on in around the attainment and how, well, I'm thinking about the soil deposit bylaw. This board has spent a lot of time, energy, and money on getting that implemented. So how are we cross-referencing and supporting that function? Because, and I'm thinking about the southern part of Cowichan Valley getting really hit hard on the soil deposit that's happening. So how can we support that bylaw function and help it do what it's supposed to do?
Ms. Miller?
Again, another excellent question, and through you to the director. That actually was a very large topic of discussion, which is one of the reasons why we have a separate technical working group looking at just the strategy related to surface water quality. So we've got groundwater quality issues, we've got surface water quality issues, but it's the surface water quality which comes up most frequently and as a kind of a key priority, given that a lot of the groundwater is really around lack of functioning infrastructure, liquid waste management, for example. So the reality check is, as we looked at it, we've expected the provincial government to provide us with regular water quality monitoring and regular water quality monitoring in order to establish objectives for each of the sub-regions within the area. And then further to that, to do regular monitoring to see where are we in respect to those objectives. What we found, and I think you and I have also had long conversations about some level of frustration with timeliness. And so, for example, we've just received the report recently for work that we did almost 8 years ago. And so what we recognize is under this program, we need to be more timely, more responsive, so that it can be used by our internal bylaw and policy structures to actually inform and respond. And so that's kind of one side of the question. The other side of the question is, well, what does that actually mean in practice? Does that mean that this function would pay for ongoing water quality, whenever something's happening in a very reactive way across the region? And the reality check that we've got in front of us, because we've doing the strategy, we're developing the budgets that support those strategies, is that the funding available to us simply does not allow us to do it at detail everywhere in the region. And so the strategy right now is to move away from the provincial 5 and 30 attainment, 3 water quality checks, a couple of times a year for a few years, and then come back 10 years later. We don't think that actually gives us useful information. What we're actually proposing is to have within the identified watersheds, the ones that are directly affecting the communities, is to have sentinel sites that have much more frequent monitoring every year, probably in the winter, the spring, and the summer, and in many cases looking at opportunities to have continuous data collection that gives us information about what the specific trend is in that system, which will allow us to much more actively inform land use activities, for example. We don't have the budget to be the science group to the bylaw enforcement. That needs to be put back on the members of the public using the polluter pay principles. So it's kind of this balance between the two, that the program would monitor at that regional, sub-regional, and watershed level to look at trends and identify early issues as they emerge, or conversely identify where we've applied policy levers and regulations and we're now starting to see an effect in terms of water quality. So one of the things, and I recognize the representative from the Cowichan Watershed Board is here, and I'll use them as an example if I may. 77 water quality monitoring sites on the Cowichan. So the question is, do we take on that responsibility for 77 sites and the cost that that implies? Or does this program provide more consistent, more frequent monitoring at key locations that give us a better picture about the health of the watershed? And that's kind of the tension that we've got. And if communities want more detail, then that's where their responsibility and role would be in terms of adding value to the program. Did that answer you?
I have for Director Smith, I have a bit of a speaker's list now. I'm very consciously aware of, we have one more report, so I'll let Director Smith, Nicholson, Stone, and Kuhn. So Director Smith. Oh, and Justice.
Through the chair, thank you very much. That was a lot of reading over the weekend, but it was definitely beneficial to finally have reports come forward. I think lots of people in the community, they've been requesting it and looking forward to it. Some of the thing, I have two questions. One is, there's the organizations, and some areas have organizations, but other areas don't have organizations. So in the south, there's quite a few organizations that have been working towards water quality and quantity over the years. But in the north areas, I'll speak for Area H and Area G and probably Ladysmith, to say that we don't have those groups that have been in place. And so how will we fit into those parts? Will staff cover the areas that have no organizations that are actually able to do some of the monitoring or some of those things? And then as the only director with Island Trust and Gulf Islands, I'm sort of wondering where the Gulf Islands and Island Trust fit into all of this. Will they go under the strategic partnerships, or will they, I didn't see them on the list there, and I'm not sure if you were referring to them as part of local government. So those are two things I would like some clarification on, please.
Ms. Miller?
Again, a great question. So first, Islands Trust was part of the Technical and Public Advisory Committee, and we've also had a number of side discussions with them. So the idea there is that they are benefiting from the program, and they would benefit from both the science component as well as the communication and the planning component. It's a little more challenging for us to give them advice vis-a-vis planning because they have a different structure. And so again, it's a technical support. So for example, I'm meeting with their senior planners in a week's time to talk about how we would help inform their planning process going forward. So that's kind of a piece there. The issue with regards to the support, the objective of the program is to provide good information everywhere we need it. And the various funding models recognize that in some areas we've got active community groups with a great deal of technical expertise. So the question then becomes, in areas where we don't have an active group, obviously staff would be doing that work. Unless we said it's a fee for service, and perhaps that group can actually provide support to other parts of the region. So this is the model of collaborative working together, right? So, we're not leaving any community behind. We're using a mixture of the funding options to meet those objectives. So if there's a stewardship group that wanted to come forward, they could either partner with us in terms of learning and procedures, et cetera, or partner with another group, or take it on themselves over time. It's not the intent that this program and the funding on the program would simply be, cashing out. The objective is, if the community is interested and it's place-based, are they willing as volunteers to help us collect data? We're covering the lab cost, we're covering all of the analysis. If they can do it as a volunteer group, that would be great. We will be requiring that the data collection follows really specific quality assurance and quality of control processes, because at the end of the day, the decisions we make are predicated on that information. So it's around relationship building.
Director Nicholson?
Thank you, Ms. Miller. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and I don't want to feel rushed because I have a lot of questions, and I think we need to have some serious discussion about the service function before it moves forward. And there's, in the recommended resolution, there's the talk about the framework, which is great, and then there's the talk about the budget stuff. And I would like to make sure that when we move forward, we separate those two. And I have some specific questions I'd like to ask right now about some of the issues that have been raised. One is related to the province. So we are proposing to spend almost $400,000 on science-based water quality and supply measuring, jobs that the province is supposed to do. And I get that information is really important. So what it speaks to me is that we need to make sure that, because it is their responsibility, that we're working very closely with them so that we're in fact supporting them to leverage more resources to do their job better, right? So I am curious about these memorandums of I don't know what A stands for, MOA. And where I'm curious about the conversations you've had with them, because I think this is really important. We don't want to head off and do our own thing, and then when push comes to shove and you have a Coxsila watershed issue, the province isn't willing to use your information or isn't really on side with what information you're bringing to the table. So that's my first question.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. Great comment, and I would have to say that I fundamentally agree with the original discussion with regards to what is the role of the province. The province also looks at it and says they work at a provincial level, they work at a regional level, they don't work at a community level, and so there is this kind of tension around it. And so what we're discussing with them under the memorandums of agreement, so we're coming to an agreement about something, is while the community may be investing in some of the capital works and infrastructure so that we get the level of detail and resolution that we need in order to make land use decisions, we'll put that infrastructure on the table. There's another really, really expensive component, and it's a component which brings in a substantial amount of liability as well, which is how do we manage that data? Where does that data reside? And what the province is bringing to the table, and it is a substantial value what they're bringing to the table, is our ability to upload that information to the provincial monitoring networks, which are overseen through a quality assurance process. It's provided publicly. It has redundancy. They, as a province, have a phenomenal amount of ability and leverage financially to make sure that the software and the analytics that go with that database are much greater than we could ever achieve on our own. And so there's a value that they're bringing to the table as well. And we need to recognize that. So that's part of the partnership.
Follow-up, Director Nicholson?
Well, just on that specific point, so these memorandums of agreement will be about working on this improved data management systems. So we'll do that very closely with them, so it'll all be tied together. Okay.
Is there another
I
question?
have more, but if you want to go to someone else.
No, you can just, you said you had two questions, so I was.
Well, then my other issue is about the guiding principles. When I look at these, I'm thinking, I can agree with all of them, but I'm curious as to why these four were the ones that were chosen. And specifically, I'm thinking that the performance standard stuff is about having reliable science. And the way it's written here is not the way you described it at the podium. And I think, this is we do need to have reliable science. There's no question about that. But where do I see this idea of measuring, a principle being measuring desired outcomes, indicators that will really tell you how well you're doing about the watershed? And I feel that the guiding principle that's a really important guiding principle that's not here is this notion that you got to think about the whole watershed. You can't just deal with one part of it. Yeah. And I guess the other thing is this whole program is the foundation of it is about we need to get into the game because we've got an issue. But there's already all sorts of work that goes on and multiple people with responsibilities and jurisdictions. So this is truly about collaboration and leveraging minimal resources. So a guiding principle really ought to be about having the flexibility to be nimble and leverage resources. And I don't really feel that I see that here.
Ms. Miller?
Yeah, maybe just brief comments, and it's a challenge to summarize a process and a fairly robust strategy into succinct language that hits every single point. But with regards to being nimble, we've tried to cover that under the notion of adaptive management and reflection throughout the program so that we can respond, we can be nimble as much as an organization like ours can over the life of the 10-year strategy itself. recognizing that it's a rolling strategy. We'll be coming back if we've got things that we will adjust as we can. With regards to the, oh dear, it's just flown out of my head and I apologize. With regards to the issue of how we measure and monitor, the strategy has some language in it which is not reflected on the placemat version of it. That establishes monitoring targets for the process of the program, but also monitoring and mechanisms that we would propose to use for effectiveness of the program. So we're making a distinction between monitoring process versus effectiveness, and we've thrown out some examples of how we might do that in time.
Director Stone?
Thank you.
Microphone, please, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's interesting because I had similar questions reading through all the documentation, and then I found that from my perspective, a lot of those questions were answered, and when you mentioned the nimble thing, I remembered the adaptive management continuous improvement specifically says program areas and initiatives will be revised and adapted in response to new information and changing conditions, which helped that objective. And the overarching theme that was repeated through all of the documentation was healthy watersheds and aquifers, and saying one goal, one water, and that was looking at everything holistically. Obviously, my level of understanding isn't as deep as Director Nicholson's from a science perspective, but from an elected official perspective, I felt like it was rational and understood to me, and also always reflecting on the original proposal for this function was significantly greater funding, and there were compromises that were clearly made to be able to deliver a workable program based on the amount of funding that was approved by the board and then by the referendum. And I think something that we don't talk about, and I know it can be an awkward conversation, so I don't want to position this as a negative thing, but the challenge around private landowners and private forest lands and the impacts on our watersheds is, in some of our areas, probably the most significant contributor to some of the challenges that we have. You know, as we move forward, I'm still struggling to understand how we make the impact that is required in terms of private managed forest lands and how they're managed in efforts to protect those natural assets and value them appropriately. There's been a lot of conversations, and Eric's here, so when it comes to the north end of our region, I know Eric and colleagues of his have been involved in a lot of discussions around water, around Stocking Lake, around Holland Lake, and I know that although I can be stubborn at times, my understanding has grown immensely over time when you know, some of the understandings and the issues, and sometimes it's the questions that are asked that help us understand better the answers we need to find. So I have a different perspective, that the sense that I get and the pressure that I feel from people in my community are around when this work will start, because until we start doing the work, collecting the data, better understanding our watersheds, and getting that information then helps us engage with our forest companies on how we better manage the lands and hopefully come to an agreement on policies and practices that will support healthy watersheds and their business objectives. Hopefully they're not always mutually exclusive, but sometimes they may be. So, you know, I feel like I'm prepared to support the recommendation, and I would make that motion if there was a seconder, and hope that we understand that it's not perfect today, that based on the input that your team has done, that we had heard from the communities, there was a desire for significantly more funding, and we have to work with what we have, and I think that this is a great place to start, and the ability to be adaptive and continually improve and adjust based on the objectives that we have, and understanding that we're all in this together throughout the region are key components for me.
Thank you. The recommendation's been moved and seconded. I still have Director Kuhn, Justice, and Wilson. Director Kuhn. And Sebring.
I have two questions. The first one is a very quick one. I would like to follow up on Director Morrison's question, and I don't think it was properly answered. You have in your paragraph here in your one of your presentations, you have the CVID advisory group stated with long-term range planning and parks and whatnot, and then B, an inter-regional advisory team with representatives from the city of Duncan Municipality, North Cowichan, and so on. Now, were those elected people or were these staff people?
We did not reach out to elected officials because that was part of the process. We had come to you to ask for input, and the direction from the board was to go to the public and the stakeholders for additional input. So that wasn't part of the target group that we had identified.
Follow up, Director Kuhn?
Yeah. The other question I have is, you mentioned earlier that that the monies in the short term were going to be used to gain information and to accumulate all kinds of data. And then you said, but that's not really what we're after. We want to get active. We want to, I don't know how you worded exactly, but you want to get into action. My question is, what kind of action actually are you looking for? Because the way I see it, like one definite action would be, for instance, to build the weir. Now, this is not part of this program, I realize that, but that's a real action. That's, okay, we're going to really change something. What other action are you envisioning with this function that would actually bring about big changes?
Ms. Miller.
Mayor, through you to the director. Great comment again. We do want to get to action. We promised the community that this would be action-oriented. We had actually quite a bit of discussion about should we have lots of action at the front end of this program's life, and decided as a collaborative that really if we were doing a lot of action, we could have lots of public communication and those sorts of things, but we were basically blowing hot air in order to inform strategic, tactical, effective action. We needed to know where the problems were and what could be done to address those problems. And so, for example, as you noted, the Cowichan Lake Weir is, through a substantial amount of discussion, not a action under this program. However, the identification of water supply and deficits is an action under this program, and the actions that would specifically come out of that would be everything from informing land use planning and growth patterns around where we should put housing and not put housing, because there may not be water. As some of our directors know, we have developments where there is no water. So, you know, we need to do the science to inform a policy action with regards to land use decision making. It may also inform actions with regards to where we actually see a trend that is beyond our capacity to deal with through policy actions, to say we actually need backup supply in these particular areas and developing strategies to do it. This program does not have the capacity to actually focus on the necessary capital works that would be required as a consequence of that. That would be works that would say, you know, we need to build, you know, new water supply dams and storage facilities for this community. That's an argument for a new function, a new service as a backup for that community. So everything kind of in between.
Director Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Miller, can you tell us some more about how the risk modeling or risk assessment would be done? I'm particularly interested in what parameters would be considered important and how they would be compared or nested or integrated. I'm just sort of wondering how you balance ecological risks with public health risks, with community values, and in particular, you know, say how, in practical terms, how you would compare the risk of an aquifer drying up to the risk posed by parrot's feather blocking the salmonid habitat.
Ms. Miller.
Again, a great question. It's great questions today. So risk assessment typically follows a very standardized process. You know, what's the hazard? What vulnerability does the community have? Gives you a measure of what the risk might be. And then once you identify the risk, you can look at mitigative or adaptive actions to either reduce the hazard, reduce the vulnerability, or attenuate the impact in some way. And so we've used a pretty standardized process. We've worked with SNC Lavalin. We finished a project with them about 2 years ago. And our charge to them was build us a predictive model that allows us to put in various data sets and then use that model through a weighted thing. What's the most important variable? What's the end product? To give us a measure of risk that we can apply at a landscape level. So there's kind of the larger modeling that helps us identify on an aggregate what communities are most at risk and what the issues are. We also have within each of the subject areas, say water quality, there would be risk associated with water quality for drinking water standards or for recreational standards or for aquatic standards. And so it drills down to detail where we need the detail. In some areas we've made assumptions about the level of risk based on single points. And so we've thrown that into the model, and it's available on our website if you want to look at it. It's a GIS model that allows us to throw in information in a very adaptive way to play with both scenarios. If we do this, does it reduce the risk? What's the background risk? What are we trying to achieve? And that's part of the discussions with the communities, and particularly First Nations communities. And when we say, when we're looking at restorative development, what's the goal? What's the target? Is that a historic target, or is it just today's average, and we want to stay with today's average? So it's this notion of moving targets and where it is and where we are related to it. So it's a structured process, as best I can tell you at this point, but more than happy to sit with you and kind of go through it if you wish.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, just one of the points that Councillor Justice has brought up with the risk assessments, it ties in with one of the questions I have with the groundwater mapping that you have here. Now, does that refer to aquifer mapping? And if it does, because I just want to get the terms clear in my own mind, when you map the aquifers, are you doing it in 2D or are you doing it in 3D? And is it possible to do it in 3D with the funds that we have?
Ms. Miller?
So there's a compound question in there if you'll give me the leeway to kind of deal with two pieces of it. When we've got the groundwater component to the program, we are interested in a couple of things. One is, where is groundwater? What's the volume of the groundwater? How does it get into the ground? How quickly does it recharge? All of those things give us an indication of what you might call the carrying capacity of that particular area, which is directly related to our ability to put people in homes in those areas. The second piece that we're really interested in is water quality. And there's water quality that is derived from, or impacts to water quality that are derived from human activities, and there's water quality that is derived by the characteristics of the place, right? It's background water quality, which might not meet drinking water standards to start with, even in a perfect world if we weren't here. So there's kind of those two pieces. With regards to how we identify groundwater, there are areas in the region where there is very little aquifer mapping. The aquifer mapping is basically driven by if we have a well, someone's put a hole in the ground, and if they did a good job in counting how far down they went and what the material was, we've got a point in a spatial place that gives us a picture. We need to build up a better three-dimensional picture of where they hit water, what the material was. So that gives us kind of an aerial that says, in this area, there's an aquifer and it's a sand and gravel aquifer. In this area, there's an aquifer and it's fractured rock. What we don't know right now is the physical relationship between an aquifer on top of each other, and does the water go down, or in some cases, the water comes up because we've got block recharge issues. So you've got a positive head that's driving water up, and what the relationship is to creeks and streams. So it's very complex, and at the end of the day, we keep having to go back to, why are we doing this work? The reason we're doing this work is to help inform land use planning, so that we know what the resource is, what the risks to that resource are, and what we can sustainably extract from the resource. And so we need to understand it first.
Director Sebring? Sure. Yeah, you're.
Thank you. Basically, I'm trying to find out how you would quantify the size of that bathtub, basically. Let's leave that one alone because it is quite complex, and I'll talk to you later on about that one. If I recall correctly, during the original referendum, and I'm not sure whether this was just for the housing as well, but there was talk about we need the funds in order to leverage other funds from the province and the various other federal things, skin in the game and that kind of thing. So are we using those funds to leverage the more funds, or are we just using it to leverage what you termed as the expertise and their background information? Do we have any funds that we've leveraged from other agencies?
Ms. Miller?
Absolutely. The province is looking at us very closely, and they're looking at us very closely for a number of reasons. One, we're entering actively into the space, and we have opinions, and so they're watching what those opinions are, because it's around changing provincial policy and opportunities. The other is they now see us as an organization that has demonstrated an interest that we will be using this information in a strategic and tactical way, and that we have skin in the game. And because of that, they're willing to spend time with us, leverage their resources against ours, and some examples of that are the use of their data management systems that we would be putting our data in. So again, it's the leveraging piece, gives them better information for their decision making, and it gives us better information. It also, to them, sends a really clear message about that this region has the capacity to maintain infrastructure and maintain the program over time. And so they're willing to actually provide funding for things. Recently, they just provided funding for 2 observation wells in the Shawnigan watershed as a result of it. They can't do that everywhere we'll need it, but they will certainly be partnering with us around what that structured program looks like. The other partner to the table, which Director or the Mayor Ladysmith mentioned, is the private managed forest lands, who have a phenomenal amount of capacity and a phenomenal amount of interest and resources that they're interested in leveraging against as well. So there are lots of parties to the table.
Director Sebring, alternate Director Haim, and then Director Kuhn. Oh, and back to Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't a question to staff. We have a motion on the table, and with all due respect, I think we should turn our attention to the motion. We've beaten up staff pretty good on this. I heard Director Nicholson talk earlier about the notion of provincial funding, and I certainly don't want to relitigate the entire function. But I recall sitting at this table as an alternate about 3 years ago, and I said, look, watershed management in the Cowichan Basin and Cooks Isle of the Valley generally is a provincial responsibility. Surely to God, somewhere in that provincial responsibility, there's a line item that says there's money associated with that. If we're going to ask for the download of the work, let's ask for the download of the money. And I don't think that was ever done. So that's kind of point one. We heard from staff that we need to work more effectively, and I'm quoting, within the limited resources that we have, that we need to do this as a slow process, and that this ties into our strategic plan. I found that one interesting, considering this board hasn't completed a strategic plan. I acknowledge this ties into the previous strategic plan, and that's the one by default that we're working on. But what I notice here is that little second bullet in the recommendation, the $172,581 increase in requisition, which by my math is about a 28% increase in the budget for this function. we've already allocated $600,000 unless staff corrects me on that. I think that's what it looks like. It's not? How much have we allocated?
Is there, just a minute, is there staff that can respond?
Okay. Finance? Whatever it is, the increase from 233 to 310 per 100,000 is a 28% increase. But when I do that math backwards, and I probably did it wrong with 600, but in any event, I just, you know, I'm wondering, and this is probably a question to staff, and this is after I
Staff is
said,
going to respond.
okay. Well, while finance is working on that, I guess I said I didn't want to ask staff questions, I just want to talk to the motion, but the first part of the motion is that we support implementation, the implementation framework for the strategy. And then the second one is that we need more money to do it. Can we support that strategy in principle without allocating the additional $172,581? I mean,
I don't think we'd have it in front of us if it could.
I just have a problem with the financial side of it, that's all.
Alternate
I'll leave
Director
it there.
Haim.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question's financial as well. In the budget amendment, proposed budget amendment, there's, under the water quality program, a decrease in community information program expense. There's a decrease in communications expense under the watershed management. There's a decrease in communications expense by $10,000 for the stewardship program. And you may have implicitly answered this in one of your other questions, but as much as we can absorb in 2021 a full year of the staff person in there, are we not setting ourselves up for a further increase in 2021 to reinstate the communications expense? And that's going to take us maybe about 50,000 short of the cap of this program.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you, if I may. Great question, and it really reflects, so when we put the budget together initially, it was without the benefit of completing the public process and the input in terms of which bucket we put those monies in. And so what we're doing is we are restructuring the budget to reflect the application of available funding into the science program and moving the communications piece to a later date once we finished the major investments at the front end. And so the budget now aligns and reflects the overall strategy and the emphasis of areas and timing of emphasis over that strategy.
Follow-up, Director Haim?
So yes, we will be looking at an increase later to reinstitute the communication side.
Ms. Miller?
So to be clear, we are not looking at increasing the overall budget. What you would be doing is once you've put the wells in, you don't need that capital cost again. So that cost diminishes and it gives you available resources to put into the planning and the communications programs further down. So we're leveraging the dollars over the life of the strategy.
Director Kuhn, and then Director Nicholson.
My population voted against this function in the beginning, so I cannot possibly vote in favor of this, especially since this represents an increase in the tax requisition, which I would never agree with anyway.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So as we're talking about budgeting, I want it to be perfectly clear that I am completely supportive of a water service function. I think we absolutely need to invest in our water, and $750,000, which is the maximum requisition, to me is minuscule compared to the issues we are going to face down the road and in fact are facing right now. What I am more concerned about is how we allocate the money that we this year, or for 2020, to best meet the current needs. And I continue to, I remain a little bit concerned, not a little bit, I am concerned about this notion of leveraging money and collaborating with the community. And what is proposed right now is $10,000 to go to the community for opportunities on leveraging stuff, is what I kind of understand here. And we need to build our capacity internally to the tune of $201,000, if my numbers are correct, from what is proposed on the changes. Yet we've had the Cowichan Watershed Board, which we've been supporting since 2010, to the tune of $50,000. And they have brought so much capacity with so little money to this region, and they are doing so much of the work on, like community outreach and riparian and all that kind of stuff and all the targets and everything. It just seems to me that we're missing the boat on how we've done this allocation. And so we are intending to continue with this $50,000 as part of, to the Watershed Board as part of this, but at the same time, we're asking them to step up potentially and be on a technical advisory committee, so that's extra work for them, but they don't get paid for it. Where is the benefit to the community in this budget, proposed budget, to step up and help us?
Ms. Miller?
It's a challenging question because it's an egg and chicken thing. So we are asking for staffing. Right now, there is no dedicated staff. The time that staff spend on this program is very minimal to get the program up and running. And so we've identified areas where we could work, based on having a staff member in place to actually help with the program implementation and to do the discussions, do the outreach, to establish contracts with consultants and drill riggers and all the rest of that work. So there's a piece of it there, but we've also recognized that there's an opportunity to work with the community, to add value to the community, and to recognize their really valuable contribution, and that's through largely a fee-for-service work. So that's an opportunity for them to come up with a proposal for the work that we need to do based on market conditions to move forward. So that's the mechanism that the group discussed and has put forward.
Great. Ms. Legault, can you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That it be recommended to the Board, 1, that the CVRD Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Strategy 2020 to 2030 and supporting implementation framework be adopted, and 2, that the 2020 budget for Function 532 Drinking Water and Watershed Protection be amended by increasing requisition by $172,581 and increasing operating expenses by $172,581.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Tim McGonigal just left. What do we got? Could you put your hands up if you're opposed, please? Well, we do have. Ms. Legault, retake the vote. Okay, so the motion is defeated. We need to move on. Director Acton?
Okay, I didn't get to speak to this motion, but also the fact that it's a budget motion, I find, No, not as counting it, but before we make any adjustments to the budget next year, we should be having a conversation of how we want it, our budget to go. No, but
Okay, are we have one more item on our agenda. Director Nicholson?
So, I don't understand why we rushed this discussion, because this is a really important discussion. It was not finished, and we are in committee. This is the time we have the discussion.
But the motion
I
was
don't-
had. This is it.
Well, the motion was on the table, but I certainly had more to say to it.
I had a speakers list that I completed every single time. So I called the question and I made sure that every speaker was able to speak. So I don't know where it went sideways.
Well,
So
I quite honestly felt rushed.
I can't help that. There was speakers that continued to speak. We're moving on now to R4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R4 is a report from the Parks and Trails Division on an update on CVRD park conditions post-rainfall event for information.
So Parks and Trails, are they going to give us an update for information? Okay, that was for information. So now I'm going to any unfinished business? New business? There is no new business. Question period. Is there anyone in the gallery wishes to ask a question on any of the agenda items today? Welcome, Mr. Evans.
Madam Chair, today when we had this presentation from Ms. Miller, she said that we rely on the provincial government to back us up. But Madam Chair, did you know that one of our biggest stumbling blocks is the provincial government? They do not follow up on their contaminated sites. They give orders to clean them up, and they pollute the water. We ask them to have this rectified, and they don't do it. They say they don't have the staff. Well, if they don't have the staff, give us some money, we'll clean it up. But, Madam Chair, we need to get this going. Thank you very much.
That was your question. Thank you so much. So now we will move to adjournment. Motion to adjourn? Excuse me. Yes? Oh, sure.
So, to the corporate secretary through you, is there any possibility of reconsidering that motion? Is there a way to do that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are opportunities to bring a question back before the Assembly, and if before the meeting adjourns today, a member who voted on the prevailing side could bring the matter back for reconsideration, or there are other opportunities that we can consider for a future meeting.
Okay, then I would like to bring it back for reconsideration.
Is there a seconder? So now it's come back for reconsideration. Well, it is all one recommendation. Oh, okay, so we'll now vote if we want to reconsider that motion. So all in favor? Oh, well, I was just going by the corporate secretary, I'm sorry. We're supposed to vote on it first, and then you can have the discussion. So, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Now we can reconsider. Sorry? When?
So this brings the question back before the Assembly, as it was before it was voted on. So the approval of the drinking water and watershed protection strategy and the budget amendment are now on the floor again.
Okay. Director Nicholson?
Could we refer this to the next meeting or to another time when we're not rushed? I know people are hungry and get grumpy when they're hungry.
I'm not sure about the next meeting for timeline, if this is a budget. So if this is about budget, so I'm thinking that it has to be, I turn to the corporate secretary.
I'm going to ask finance for comment, but I know that the budget amendment is coming forward on March 11th at the board meeting.
So does that leave us to reconsidering this after the board meeting today? Finishing regional services after our board meeting today. That was, I'm speaking to the corporate secretary at the moment. Okay, so we can recess this meeting and come back after our board meeting to reconsider that resolution. Do I need a motion to that fact, or can I just? Okay, so we need a motion in that respect. It's moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.